Okay, we should be live here on the YouTube channel. I am just flipping between my two screens here to make sure that everything looks like it's supposed to. Sarah is here. She just ran down the hall for a minute to shut some doors so Chewy doesn't go exploring while we're live streaming today. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing. We're going to be using gouache, and gouache is simply an opaque watercolor. So if you don't have gouache, you can use acrylics for this. I wouldn't use your regular watercolors because you're going to go through a lot of them, and watercolor paint's more expensive than gouache typically. So you would go through a lot and you wouldn't get the benefit because the colors wouldn't really show up on a dark surface like we're using here. I'm using a piece of matte board actually, and you can kind of see it's black matte board, but if I tip it to the light, you can kind of see where the paint is and where it's just raw matte board. In a frame under glass with a matte, you'd want to frame this just like you would a regular watercolor. You wouldn't even see that, but if it bothered you, you could hit it with a little fixative or just like a light varnish spray just to kind of even out the glossiness if that bothered you. Gouache is a very flat or matte paint, so you can layer over with other media like pastels and colored pencils if you want to, and it's a lot of fun to use. I'm going to show you, well, Sarah's back in the house.
Hi!
I'm going to show you the package here. These are from Arteza. They're a fairly new company, and I have to say, anything I've used from them has been outstanding. This set is on sale on Amazon for like $18.89, but don't let the price put you off. They're not junk. On all of the labels, they even tell you what paint is on there. Like this says pigment yellow 3, so it's got all your pigment numbers except for the peach. It's called peach red, which actually I think is like an opera pink, so it doesn't have a pigment there. It has a like a color index number. I think it's like your rhodamine neon pigment there, but the colors we're using here are pretty basic ones you're used to seeing, and if you have like acrylic paints or oil paints and you're following along, I'm sure you'll have something that can substitute in. So they said the regular price on these were like $60, but it's 18 something on Amazon, and they seem to be really good quality. So I just wanted to throw that out there in case you were looking for a reasonable gouache, but like I said before, use what you have. We are going to begin by sketching on matte board with a white chalk pencil or a white watercolor pencil. The only reason I say don't use a regular colored pencil is because it's waxy and your paint isn't going to stick to that. So you wouldn't want to do that. I'm just going to set my reference that I just painted this morning in front of me so I can see it. Oh, it wants to fall. So sorry, technical difficulties. There we go. I also have a photograph, but I can't share the photograph because it's from Paint My Photo. You're welcome to follow the link and go check it out. But with the Paint My Photo photos, you don't have the permission to share the photographs off the website. But anybody can go get a free account and you download it for themselves. Am I forgetting anything, Sarah?
I don't think so.
All right. Oh, if you have questions, type the word question in all caps, and then Sarah can, either the moderators will answer it or Sarah will send it to me if the moderators don't know or it hasn't been asked before. I'm going to start off by putting a line about a third of the way up the paper, or matte board rather, just to give me kind of a table line. And these do sound really scratchy, so I apologize. I know it's going to bug some people, but it's only for a brief period of time when we need to do this. We need to use this. I'm going to put a little like napkin kind of coming off the edge here. So it's kind of like a rectangle. I know it's awfully scratchy. I'll have it fold. The fold of the table maybe right there. And I am going to put an orange here. These lines will dissolve when we paint over them, so don't worry about being too bright with them. And then I want to put a little plate here. So I'm going to start off, this is kind of like a squared plate. I'm going to start off with two parallel lines. And then I'm actually going to let it come over the napkin a little bit here in front of the orange. And then I'm going to connect it with a curve. And then the other end of the plate, I'll just make a curve as well. Actually, I'll flip it over and do that because it's easier for me to do the left-hand sides of things. You can even just smudge out any lines you don't need if they're getting you confused. Okay, look at that. We have a circle. We've got a rounded rectangle, and we've got a kind of rectangle-like shape. So nothing's too crazy here. I'm going to put a couple parallel lines down here for our little bowl of oranges. It's going to hide right behind the plate, and it's going to have a curved line at the bottom, about yay high. We'll make it a little bit wider. We want to make sure we got room for our oranges in there. And then on the plate, we've got some orange slices, and this is probably the most challenging thing to sketch, but really, they're semicircles, okay? So we'll just put a semicircle down here. We're gonna put a, let's break this up into semicircle shapes because they're kind of clumped together. But then we got one semicircle there. We don't see the other half of it because it's behind that orange slice. And we're gonna do another one over here. So it's really just kind of like a cluster of oranges. We're going to do another, we can make this one a little bit bigger too so we have a little more room for detail. We're going to do another semicircle here. We'll bring that up a little higher. And another one connected to it by a little membrane there. I'm going to bring this bottom edge of my plate down a little bit. You can use an eraser on these. I'm just going to grab my kneaded eraser because that's what I have right here. You usually don't rub with a kneaded eraser, but I don't have a regular eraser here. I'm going to bring that down a little bit lower. And I want to have room for this slice of orange rind here. So it's kind of like a boat shape. Actually, you know what? I'm going back to the original line. Sorry for those of you following along. I'm going back to my original line because I realized I had that orange slice down a little low. My bowl was fine. Gotta trust your instinct sometimes. So this is overlapping. Let me get the smiley line here. Bring that up. So this is the inside of the orange rind. And then we'll see the outside of the orange rind under there. We'll clean it up when we paint it. Don't worry. And we could put, do we want one more on there or is that enough? What do you think, Sarah? That's quite a bit.
I think that's good, yeah.
I think that's probably plenty on there. Okay, so make sure our napkin is all right. All right. And another thing you can do to remove those lines is to wipe them with a little water. That will get rid of them too. So the thing I realized when I was painting the first one is that I can go in pretty broadly with my color at first, and then I can add my texture later because you can always go back and re-wet the images on your paper because, or your mat board rather, because they are like a watercolor. They're just opaque. They are going to be able to be removed and readjusted for an infinity unless you like sprayed it with a varnish. So I'm going to start off with a brown. I'm going to grab some burnt sienna here. I'm just going to put it over here on my palette. My brush is wet. Your paints, my paints are drying out really fast because of the weather. So if you have that situation, you might need to dip your brush. These are very opaque. I was surprised at how opaque they were even when I was wiping my brush, like wetting my brush a lot and thinning them out. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I'm grabbing a little ultramarine. I'm going to add that into my burnt sienna to make a nice gray. I'm going to grab a little, I'm cleaning my brush, grabbing a little yellow ochre. I'm going to add that right over there. Okay, and I am going to throw in, I'm kind of working back to front. I'm going to start with, actually I'll start with the shadow on the back wall first, and that's just going to be black. So in gouache, I will use black and white. I mean, I don't use a ton of it, but for highlights and whatnot, because we don't have white paper here, we're using a black mat board, I will go ahead and use those colors. You can layer really well if you're really gentle with your brush strokes. If you're not so gentle, you will pick up the color that's underneath. But I find it's pretty easy to control. It's a very forgiving medium. So all I'm doing here is just giving it a little bit of shadow on that kind of back wall area. The light's coming from this direction in. So towards the front and to the left, that's the direction of our light source. Okay, now I'm going to go with my table color. I'm going to start off with this darker color here. And I'm going to throw some of this in my darker areas, which would be to the right. And my brush is wet, the paint's wet. It's not as wet. Like, you'd have it wetter for watercolor, but I'm working on a matte board, so I don't really have to worry about warping. You're pretty, you have a lot of options of what you can use this paint on because you don't need to add a lot of water to it and it's very opaque. It's not going to be permanent though, so you wouldn't want to paint your wall with it or it would drip off. So you could paint your windows with it for a holiday and then you could wash them off when the holiday is done. Kind of like a chalk marker. These remind me a lot of watercolor crayons too, so if you're watercolor crayons, you could color in with the crayons, do these same techniques. And I'm not even going to clean my brush. I'm going to pick up this lighter color over here. I'm going to hit the corner of that tabletop. And I think I'll drag that color in from the opposite side. And don't worry if you get brush strokes you don't like because you can blend them out later. In fact, I think I'll switch to, this brush is like, I think it's called a Wisp. It's from the Zen line in Royal and Langnickel. They have a line that's, they have a watercolor line which has really absorbent brushes, but they've got this line for actually all media. It's they're Taklon synthetic brushes, so they have some special effects ones, and then just the regular flats and filberts and rounds that you've come to be accustomed to. I like their brushes a lot. And they actually have a Zen, I do believe, don't 100% quote me on it, do your own research, but I'm pretty certain that their Zen Hog brushes for oils are synthetic. So they've also come out with a synthetic Hog, which is nice, because you want something durable for your oils. And then if I thought that was too streaky, because of that Wisp brush, it's too much texture, too much wood grain, I can go in with a wet brush. And even just blot it a little bit to get the excess water off. And I can work those colors together. And I can go in and add more. So nothing is truly finished unless you want it to be. And you could even scrub some of that paint up if you wanted to get back to the matte board color. It'd probably leave a little bit of a ghosting, but it's an option. Any questions so far? This is a new medium.
I was just, you were giving a lot of nice information that we hadn't had. Let me get up to.
I'm going to clean up a little bit on my palette while I'm at it.
Incoming call.
Oh boy. Jason is not here right now, so they'll have to leave a message.
Frugalite's not here.
No, the girls had an eye appointment, and I was thinking, oh shoot, I'm going to have to cancel my live stream. They're like, no, I'm not.
No, I'm not. My assistant can take care of that. Steph Gibson, what is the difference between watercolor and gouache?
The only difference is that gouache is opaque.
Bev Roberts, would drawing with Inktense pencils work for this?
You wouldn't approach it in quite the same way because Inktense are transparent, so you'd still need to be on like a white paper. And once Inktense are dry, you can't lift them back up again. So if you have like a watercolor crayon or acrylic paint, those more opaque mediums would be a much better fit if you're trying to follow along exactly. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is work on the napkin. I just cleaned out a little space in my palette. And I'm going to grab some ultramarine blue. I'm going to grab a little bit of phthalo blue too. And the thing I like about the set is they, and obviously use what you have. You don't have to get these, you don't have to use this brand or these types of paints if you don't want to. But I like that they use a real artist's names for colors so that you're not like, it's not like a big crapshoot, you know what you're getting. And I'm going to get a puddle of that. And I didn't put white out on this palette only because I didn't have space. I was rescuing an old watercolor palette and I didn't have any blank spots in there. So I didn't clean it very well. So I had to put a little white on its own. And I'm adding a little bit of white to that, a little bit of water to my white because it just dries so fast. And the colors are really strong. So, if you don't put any water with it, it just wants to stop. It won't like flow. So what I'm going to do is make some gingham checks with the white on this napkin. I wasted a lot of time when I was painting my demo, and I'm so glad I did because I was out of practice with gouache, by just like kind of putzing around with little bits of paint instead of like putting down as much as I wanted. And then when I have this edge here, which is going to fall down the corner, I want to bend the line a little bit.
A Voltink, can you use gouache on paper for acrylics?
Yeah, you can use gouache anytime you use acrylics. Absolutely. The only thing to remember is that it's not permanent. Like you wouldn't want to use it on like on a piece of furniture and then expect to be able to wipe down the furniture when you're done.
Angela Blanchard, will the gouache smear? Do you need to use a fixative?
You honestly should treat this just like a watercolor painting, which means you should frame it under glass. So yeah, it would smear otherwise if it got wet. It wouldn't, just like if you rubbed your hand over it and it was all dry, it's not going to do anything. It's going to be just like a watercolor. But if you sprayed it with water and then rubbed your hands across it, it would just reactivate and smear. So I probably wouldn't use a fixative on it unless I had some uneven background, like whatever I was painting on was glossier than the paint and there was uneven finishes on the painting. But once you frame it and you get that glass in there, you're not going to see that shine difference. So I probably wouldn't even bother. Now I'm going to grab the blue, and I'm going to do a row of blue. I think I might go with a slightly wide brush. I felt like that was a little too narrow for what I was doing. And you clean your brushes just like with watercolor. For the most part, you just need to rinse them. If you do get like one really caked with paint, you could go wash it with a brush cleaner or some baby shampoo or something.
And I apologize for this name pronunciation. Katerina Swerdowska. Do you have any tricks to paint in very hot climates? Where I am, water evaporates super quickly and I end up with hard edges. I paint outside, so there's no AC.
Did she watercolor, or did she say what she's using for paint?
She didn't say, but I'm assuming watercolor.
I keep just a spray bottle of water, and I would really wet my paper like front and back. I would get a painting board about the same size as my paper. I would wet the back, stick it down, clip it to my board, and then wet the front. So that paper is completely saturated, and that's going to give you a little bit better of a result, I think. And you can go in and soften anything later too. If you decide that like your napkin's too bright or the colors are too intense, when you're like later, you could just go in there and you can soften your colors. So it's very forgiving. And make sure you drag a little color over the neighboring elements that you have, because that will make sure you don't have any gaps. Now, so if I'm going to go paint that orange, I wouldn't want that blue, but the colors don't mix. Like watercolors get muddy a lot easier than gouache does. I can just go in like this and I can just scrub out what I don't want. I can just blot it. It's very easy.
Steven Sapos, is honey a good additive for gouache?
I probably wouldn't bother with it if you're using your paints regularly and you're spritzing your palette to reactivate them each time you go to use them. I don't think it's really needed. Gouache does tend to crack in the palette more than other types of paint, so there is that. But I don't know, maybe a drop or two of glycerin or honey if you're traveling with them and you're afraid they're going to crack and fall out of your palette. If you're working at home and you're keeping your palettes flat, I would just, if you spray the whole palette every time you're going to go use it, I think you're going to be fine. So I would say just for travel. And I'm just going to paint this plate yellow. I'm going to try to paint around the slices there just so I don't lose my sketch. But remember, if you lose your sketch, it's just semicircles. Nothing to get, too concerned about. And this painting will be in the hot mess stage several times. I almost like backed out of the tutorial. I was like, oh my word, if I can't get this thing to come out before showtime, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to do this. But I want to do something different. just kind of touching in little bits anywhere I think I would have that yellow. Now I added a little too much water with that, so what I'm going to do is get a filbert brush. I find filberts to be really nice for this type of paint, and I rarely ever use a filbert in watercolor, but I really like it with this type of paint. I'm going to grab some vermilion, and I'm going to grab some medium yellow. Now, gouache tends not to be as light fast as watercolor, and that's usually due to the opacifiers that they have to put in there to make them opaque. It's kind of spreading out that film of paint. There were light fast ratings on these, I think. I didn't really look at them too much because I never count on gouache being light fast. I see 3 stars there, but I'd have to look at the code on the box at some point and see if there's a key on the box to say. Maybe Sarah could look at that.
I'm sorry, what am I doing?
I just had a lid to that Arteza box. I don't know where I set it. That's the bottom, but I had the lid to it, and it has a rainbow on it. It might say how light fast the colors are or what the color code means. I seriously just had it too. Oh, right here. If you can see on the back, see if it gives light fast ratings anywhere, or it says like what stars equal what. So I'm taking this like orange mix and I'm just adding it to the edge of the plate here.
It's not giving anything on here, but it has a quirk code, and it gives you the website address, which is arteza.com. So I'm thinking maybe on the website you could get light fast ratings, because it's not saying here.
Maybe, because I don't know if they're on the ASTM scale or the Blue Will scale. Does it say ASTM on the box anywhere?
Yep, ASTM.
Okay, so generally with the ASTM scale, I believe. Oh, now I'm confused. I believe 1 is best, 2 is good, and 3 is.
It says ASTM D and EN71 it conforms to.
Yeah, that's a safety regulation, but usually if they're the ASTM, they're using the ASTM scale, I believe.
So I would say maybe go to the website.
They might have that, yeah. And if it's not on, you could probably.
Because they put the website twice on here.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that they would have that information.
If I find some information on that, because I do have contact with the owners, I will post it on my blog on this post so that you guys can find it. But usually gouache isn't light fast, so that's why I didn't even really think about checking. I'm going to grab a little bit of black. I just like to get these underneath colors done first, because then when I don't have to fuss around my focal points. I'm just throwing in some shadows there. And for whatever reason, I feel like black works a little more naturally when you have an opaque color. When you're mixing into an opaque, I'm not exactly sure why that is, but it just seems to be the case. That corner's not quite right, so I'm going to fix it when I go to do my orange. And clean my brush. And I'm going to make kind of more of a peach color. So I got my white. And I'm just dipping into this area that's got more yellow in it. I think I might end up just like taking like a little pan, like a full pan or something, and just putting white in it and keeping it separate so I can have that to dip from. Although it's not a bad idea to just grab a little white as you need it, because it can get contaminated so easily. And you could also just squeeze out your paint as needed on on a plate. And that would work just fine. You don't have to have a palette for your gouache. You don't have to let it dry out. The reason I like this over acrylics is that I can do that, because I don't like to have to stop and squeeze out paint when I want to go paint, and I don't like the idea of wasting what I don't get a chance to use. All right, I think that's good enough. Good enough for now for that. Now we're going to go on this vessel back here. So basically I want to hit all these things that are being overlapped by other things and get them out of the way. So I am going to use, you can use some gray from the tube. I'm actually going to grab that because it's just, and it tells you, and that's what I like, it tells you what pigments, so whatever brand of paint you buy, try to find ones that give pigment information, because this one tells me it's pigment black 11 and pigment white 6. That's the black I have there, that's the white I have there. So I could either mix those two together, or I could just take this. I know what I'm getting myself into. And you don't always get that with a less expensive paint. So I just wanted to, so that way I know that if I use this gray, it's going to work with those two colors, because it's just a convenience mix of colors I already know. A lot of times when you have a mixed color, you don't know what it is, and so you're just taking a crapshoot, and that's why I usually mix my own grays. I kind of look at gouache almost like markers or color pencils, where you do less mixing because you have more options. You still want to mix your colors, but you don't need to mix as much as with watercolor, I don't think. And plus, I don't want to have a bunch of secondary tubes left over after I've used up all the main ones. It will help me use the set more evenly. But if you're getting started and you want to go with tube colors, you could just get your basics and mix everything. Nothing wrong with that. This is going to dry pretty much as soon as you put it on the mat board too, because the mat board's going to absorb some of the water. But wet brush, you can reactivate it, so don't worry if you didn't get a blend in or if it's looking choppy, because it's gonna have the hot mess stage, and then you'll fix it. If your brush feels like it's dragging, just dab it in the water. Now on this vessel, we got a lot of colors. I'm actually going to fill the whole thing in because these paints layer so well. And remember, you can smooth it out later, so don't worry about choppy brush strokes. And then I'm going to go in and add some, I'll add some shadow here on this side away from the light, under the lip. I like gouache because you can get a really realistic look with it, or you can get a complete like pop art look with it too. So it's very fun. It's easy to achieve different looks. And I'm going to grab some other colors that I've used, but I'm going to keep the dirty brush. I'm going to pick up some of this because the vases, the bowl isn't really reflective. It's just a little bit, so it's going to take on that local color. So I had a hard time with the one I did here. I had to keep toning it down because I had the reflections in there too bright. So I spent more time just trying to fix it than I would have if I had just painted the whole thing gray to begin with and then added the colors on top. And I'm going to grab some orange that I know the oranges will be reflecting. I think I will rinse my brush a little for that. But I'll put it on fairly loosely so it will blend into the paint underneath. It's like the look of acrylic with the ease of watercolor. A lot of people say acrylic's easier, but for me, I like the ease of having my supplies ready to go whenever I want to paint.
Without any special cleaning.
Yes, cleaning. I hate cleaning acrylic brushes. And I'm going to grab some white. I'll go ahead and do that now. You could wait and do the white later, do the white on the front, but I like to get my values in, my lights and darks. I feel like I need a bigger mixing area though. That's the only thing with this palette I feel like I could use. A larger, I should have brought a plate. And then to give it that kind of brushed look, you want to take a fan brush. You could even use like an oil painting fan brush. That would even, probably a little on the stiffer side is better. You want it like moderately wet, so you don't want it sopping, but you want the bristles wet enough so that when you drag it back and forth, you kind of disturb, it's enough to disturb the paint. So I'm going to rinse, blot the excess, just kind of blot it with my fingers, get any drops off of there. And when I drag it back and forth, I want to go with the contour of that top lip. So I've got some chalk in there, so I don't know if you can really see the curve, but oh, maybe you can see with that black shadow, it's got a curve there. That's really what I'm trying to match up. Give us that nice brushed metal look. And then I can go in and pick up some white with the tip of this brush. And I can kind of flick it through here. Go over my brighter highlights and just kind of add it in there. Okay, I think that's all right for now. And oh, I forgot to sketch the oranges in our pot here, so I'm just gonna put those in there really quick. Sorry for the scratching noise. There we go. And again, we're gonna base coat these in, so we're gonna keep them pretty bold. I'm gonna grab this vermilion color. And I'm going to start with the one in back, because back to front. I got that a little too watery. If you can see how it's kind of streaky, so that's too much water. So what I'm going to do is just kind of mix in with some of that dried paint that I have on my palette there to help dilute that out. And you'll get the feel for how thin or thick you want your paint.
Chris Krumenacker, what makes gouache more opaque than watercolor? Is it just more pigment, or does it have another additive to make it thick?
Well, different companies will do different things. Some originally companies would just add white, but that really makes the paint not very sound, because it spreads out your pigment particles so much that they can't defend themselves as well against fading and other environmental damage. So some companies just have a higher pigment load and a little bit of opacifiers, and some have more opacifiers, which would be like white or a chalk or something, just to make the light not pass through. So it's kind of a combination. It's not pure pigment, because then it would still be transparent. It's got to have something in there of body, but it's not just adding white paint to your watercolor. Would give you a gouache, but it would be very it'd still be very translucent, and the color would be very weak. So it's a combination of heavier pigments and opacifiers.
Lori Hill, can you spatter with gouache, or is it too thick a medium?
No, you can spatter. You need to thin it down, just like you would with acrylic paint.
Bev Roberts, what size of mat board is Lindsay using?
I would say I would probably trim it to like 8 by 10. I would say this is probably like 9 by 10. It was just a scrap I had left over from picture framing. I save all my smaller scraps and use them for painting with gouache or watercolor crayon or color pencil or oil pastel. Okay, I'm going to clean my brush. I'm going to grab a little more of that ultramarine while I'm at it. Make myself my little shadow puddle.
Moonram, do you work light to dark or the other way with gouache?
You work in layers like you would acrylic. So I would say back to front, because it's opaque and you can keep layering it. I was just adding a little more shadow there since I mixed them up and I thought it felt a little bright. If you have any leftover chalk pencil, when you're done, you can take a wet Q-tip and wipe it off. So don't feel like you have to paint over a stray line if you have it. I've got a little stray chalk line there, but I'm not going to let it bother me. I'm going to go into this one next. My shadow at the bottom and then my shadow over here. And if it's comfortable for you to move your painting as you're going, go ahead and do that. I moved my test one a lot while I was working on it. I try to keep it fairly stationary when I'm doing the tutorial so it's easier for you guys to watch. It doesn't make you sick if you're watching it in double time. And with the red on its own, I'm going to fill in the middle. Overlap the shadow. And I'm going to clean my brush so I can grab some yellow. Now you are using it thicker than watercolor, so you're going to go through it faster. So like where a tube of watercolor might last you years, a tube of gouache used for the same amount of paintings might last you months. So, you know, it's like acrylics. You're going to use, or oils. You're going to use more because the film that's on the paper when you're done is going to be thicker. I'm just going to blend that in with the other colors there because my brush is really wet. And I feel like that could use a little white, and I've got a mix with some white in it right there. And so I didn't clean my palette off after my test painting because I knew I was going to paint the same thing over again. And any of those leftover paints I can just re-wet. When I'm done painting today though, unless I was going to paint another orange, I was doing a series of oranges, I would just clean out my mixing areas and I would leave the paint that's in the wells alone. So using a watercolor palette would be really good for gouache if you did want to, you know, not wash off all the paint every time, if you wanted to have some kind of set up and ready to go. And don't worry about blending because we're going to go in and do more texturing to it and everything later. We're just getting in color at this point. Try to keep that lip of the pot fairly clean. I'm going to turn my paper for this though because it's just easier, a lot easier to have your brush pointing at the edge you're trying to paint. And I'm going to get just a little bit of black in my brush. I'm going to pick up that other shadow, the color that I mixed, and I'm just going to get right up against that edge of the pot and just define it. How many people do we have today with us?
We have 298.
Cool. Some people were confused. They saw because I didn't have my my practice piece done, so I just had my generic live stream picture up, and they thought they were getting a jewelry making tutorial because it was a bunch of ribbons. I'm like, oh. Yeah, you wouldn't want to watch me make jewelry live. Maybe Sarah, she's probably faster than me, but
Depends.
if you like watching somebody drop beads for...
Oh, well, I'm doing that all the time. Ting, ting, ting. I also tend to get a little obsessive about like my eye pins and stuff like that, like making head pin.
Loops.
Yeah, making the loops. I'm like, that's crap, and I'll snip it off and put it off to the side because I usually buy the long ones. So if I have to snip off a little bit, I'll save it for.
Yeah, I get the long ones too. And I have to have my head like practically on like an inch away from my jewelry. I was going to switch my glasses before I started today. I forgot. My eyes were getting really tired doing the practice one. And I'm just oranging that up a little bit more. And then we're going to do the same to this guy over here because that's also just an orange. Any questions so far?
Yes, let me get up. We have a lot of chat.
That's good.
Mandy A, Mixed Media Queen, what is the brush you can't live without for watercoloring?
For watercoloring, it would be probably a number, I would say either a number 8, number 10, or number 12. Synthetic Swirl Around, either Mimic would be my first choice. Second choice would be Princeton Neptune. Yeah, I think those would be either those two brands, but that would be the size. Because you can paint pretty much anything with that. However, I hardly ever use rounds in acrylic or gouache, unless I'm just using like a tiny detail. Different paints do respond better to different brushes.
Moonram, will gouache work on as thin a paper as a coloring book?
If you don't use too much water, but then you're gonna not have that much flow, I don't think I would really recommend it for a coloring book, because it would also cover up your lines. Where like if you're using watercolor in a coloring book, you'll still have your lines, unless you didn't want it, unless you want to cover your lines then, and your paper was more robust, I guess. I probably wouldn't. I would be afraid of it like kind of just dissolving and tearing the paper because it's usually on the thin side. Watercolor crayons would be a better bet because you can sharpen them and save the shavings in a palette like this for when you're painting. But then you could use the crayons and then use like a water-based blender, not a water brush, but they have these markers that just have like a clear solution of like glycerin and water in them. Tombow makes one, Stampin' Up makes one, and that's what I would use because that will just let you glide the color around, and you can still have that opacity, but you have the control and you don't have too much water.
Steven Sapos, has Lindsay used the watercolors of this brand, and did she like them?
I got some. I haven't used them yet. I actually, a few people had asked for some reviews on some of their other products, and then I contacted the owner because I knew him because he had sponsored videos in the past, and I asked him if he wouldn't mind sending me a couple of the things that the viewers requested, and he sent me the squash, which I'm just delighted with, and he also sent some watercolors, which I haven't tried yet. So I'll try them and I'll review them and let you guys know. It might be a couple of weeks. I'm kind of backlogged with
Well, what's your partner doing here, huh?
He is, well, Jason could review them. He doesn't typically paint, but
oh, I know. I'm just teasing.
He has been he got the website running. Well, he got the shop up on the website yesterday. So I have not added my whimsical descriptions of my lovely paintings, but they're up there for sale. Some of them anyway. We'll probably put up a different collection every month. So they're there for purchase. He just got them up yesterday, but he's been closed captioning videos, and it's so funny because I polled the audience and to see is this like important to you? Would you like this feature? And I asked people, if you use closed captions, can you answer a couple questions? And I said, one, does it matter if it's all grammatically correct, or do you just need the words right, and some capitalization is good, but it doesn't need to be perfect? And I asked, why do you use closed captions? Are you like hard of hearing, or is it so that you can improve your comprehension, or what are your reasons? And a lot of people use them because they don't want to disturb somebody. They're maybe sitting in the living room and somebody's watching TV or studying and they want to watch a video, or they're at the library, or they're learning English as a second language. And God help these people learning English as a second language, listening to me yammer on at 100 miles an hour. That's got to be awful. So I thought that was.
I thought YouTube had a way to slow down the.
You can slow it down to 1.5,
Right.
1.5 times. A lot of people don't know about that. In fact, I hear people speeding stuff up all the time. But it was like some viewers that recommended that hey, if she speaks too fast, slow it down in the settings.
Yeah, because you can do that on podcasts too.
Oh, that's right. You can
at
listen
least
to
through
stuff
iTunes.
fast.
There's an option for it's like 1.5. It's like 1.5 or 2. 1.5 or 2. 2 is like 1.5 is much slower.
Yo, I bet. Oh, that's good to know. I use the captions like it's if like we're all in the living room and the kids are working on homework, or Jason's watching something on TV. I'll put the captions on so I can kind of get the gist of what's going on. The auto captions are all right, but sometimes they're a doozy and they're completely wrong. So Jason's going through them and fixing them. And
yeah, John got me a pair of Bluetooth earbuds, and I love them. Because if he's home and he wants to watch TV, but I want to sit down and listen to a podcast, I can just stream the podcast through my earbuds.
Right.
And it's nice. Or I can do it with YouTube too, because I can just pull up my YouTube app and watch a video, so
right.
The wireless earbuds are lovely.
Oh, then you don't have the cords to get
Exactly.
tangled up and ruined.
Plus, once someday when the weather gets nicer and I go for walks outside, I can just put my phone in my pocket or in my coat pocket and just have my earbuds around my neck instead of a cord getting caught or pulled out or whatever.
Yeah, I don't use earbuds. I use like the big, like earmuff looking headphones, and I'll go walking with them. I probably look like a person out of the 70s or something, but I like them because they kind of do muffle the sound. I can still hear like traffic and stuff, but it muffles out a lot of sound.
Christy Yant, I've been following your tutorials using a 4x6 watercolor block, which sometimes makes for some very small and crowded compositions. Any tips for scaling down?
That's hard. I have a hard time going small. I always run out of space. Probably my tip would be to take a pencil and draw a frame about 1/4 of an inch in on all 4 sides, just really lightly, and try to fit your composition in there. So then when you sprawl, inevitably you'll have a little room to fit your stuff in. It doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter like what size I start out on. I always seem to fill or go beyond the edges. So here I'm just blocking in my my fruit slices. If you want to go back in, if your paper's dry, and re-sketch your slices, go right ahead. I know they could get lost really easily. Again, we're just using the scarlet red and the medium yellow. We're not using a heck of a lot of colors. I mean, it's shocking to use white and black, I know. Feels a bit naughty. And just try to keep the colors kind of bright on the slices. We are going to go in with shadows and like details and stuff. Just try to get them blocked in, but just make sure they're not like a big blob. Try to keep them separate somehow, like by varying the value. And it's okay if they don't cover, if you don't have 100% coverage, because they are kind of translucent. And try to keep your brush strokes like kind of like up and down, so that you get kind of like that how like a slice of fruit has those little sections of juice, so you get kind of like those that striation in there.
Juice.
Oh, I've been getting so much citrus at the grocery store. There's been so much. It must be in season. Oranges and clementine and grapefruit. And then the rind, we're going to mix a lighter color up. So I'm just going to clean off my brush. I'm going to see what I can salvage from this white. I think I've got probably enough there. And I'm going to paint the inside section. That is a little on the watery side, so don't have yours quite as watery as I have mine. I want that to poke up a little bit more. And that's a nice thing, because if you decide you want to resculpt it, you can just kind of liquefy the paint underneath. So you have that option there. And then for the outside of the rind, I'm going to grab some orange that I mixed with the scarlet. There's a couple shades of, there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shades of red and pink in the set. Not any orange, but orange is really easy to make. Just grab the red that looks the most orangey.
Chris Krimenaker, I would like to know what they use as opacifiers in the gouache.
I believe they use precipitated chalk or PW4, pigment white 4, because it's less strong as like a pigment white 6, which would be your titanium white, I believe. But it still gives it some body. But the chalk also gives it, because it's chalky, and it's a lot of times you'll see student grade watercolors, and maybe it's because they spread them out so much when you paint with watercolors and you use so much water, and maybe that's why it looks different. Maybe there's not a heck of a lot of difference between a gouache and a student grade watercolor, because that chalk separates out. But since you're using it thick here, you don't get that separation, I think, anyway. I wonder if Rich is watching. If is a spin doctor in the house?
I haven't seen him, that doesn't
He
mean
would know.
He's not here.
He would know. So what you got to do is go over to the Spin Doctor on YouTube and type that in his comments. Hey, Lindsay sent me.
Lindsay sent me, this is my question. Please answer. Moon Ram, what other mediums combine well with gouache? Like pastels, colored pencils, etc.
Honestly, just about anything. Because it's got such a toothy surface, you can paint over it. I probably wouldn't do oils. Oils would go on top of it, but whatever your substrate is might not be suitable for oils. Like if you have because if you gessoed this and then went over it with gouache, it makes your gouache too vulnerable because it can't bond well with your surface. But with oils, if you don't have your surface primed, it will eat away at the material that you have underneath. So I'd probably stick away from oil paint. You could use oil pastels, but again, you still eventually might run into that situation as the oils can migrate. Oh, I got some ultramarine blue on there. I wonder how that happened. I'm not gonna worry about it. All right, I still feel like that rine's gonna need a little bit more color in it, but I'm not gonna worry about that now. I am gonna add some more shadows in the bowl though, and I want to grab some of this dark color, I think. Add it in with a little of that gray. I just like to use colors I've already used for the most part, and put some little shadows under these oranges.
Jill Mascianica, how can you match a mixed gouache color once it's dry?
There isn't that big of a shift in color. It does get a little bit I don't want to say duller because it dries matte. It goes on kind of glossy and dries matte, but the color doesn't really shift that much. If you look, this one's completely dry, and if you look at this compared to my palette, there's not a big color shift from the wet paint to the dry paint, even on my palette from the wet puddle to the dry puddle. So it just changes in the glossy appearance, but it doesn't really shift. So you can mix and match pretty easily. You don't get the shift. Like acrylics get darker when they dry and watercolors get lighter, but you don't get so much of a shift here. I'm sorry, what were you gonna ask?
I thought you were done answering. Mary shows, would you use gouache on watercolor cards? Does the color flake off when handled?
Oh, no, it won't flake off any more than watercolor would. I mean, if you used it really thick, it could flake off, but this is designed to be on paper. It's just the big difference is that it's opaque. It uses the same binder as watercolor. Okay, I want to jump around a little bit, give those slices a chance to set up, and I can work on different parts of the painting. I am going to go, and I feel like I need a little bit of shadow kind of underneath that orange area. I'm just going to use that same color I just had. Maybe a little bit of black in there. So it's gray, black, little ultramarine blue. I want to give just a little bit of shadow right underneath the orange on the napkin. You wouldn't have too much, but just something. And I think I'll use a little bit of that over there in the pot. So if you do get some paint splattered on your paper and you didn't realize it, you can go in there and lift it out. And that's why I don't recommend you don't clean your palette till you're all done, because then I can just grab whatever color I used for the table and fill it in, or I can probably just spread this out actually to cover that hole that I just made. I'm grabbing some black here. Fairly, not really watery, but definitely loose. And I'm going to put that right underneath my little bowl here. And on the opposite side, on the right hand side of my plate, so I can pull a little shadow out. And also to the right of the pot up here. It's going to absorb into the color underneath it, so it's not going to be super distinct when it dries, so don't worry about trying to match it up or blend it in. It'll kind of blend on its own. and just a little bit next to the fabric, because the fabric would cast a little bit of a shadow. Cast a little shadow rather. And a little bit up here near this orange, but on the table. It can help you clean up that line too if you got a little sloppy. So that's probably the thing. Like you're wet if you're working on black and you've got like wet paint. When it dries, you're going to see the color. Because I'm working on black, anything wet I put down on the paper is going to look really black if it's like really watery. And then as it dries, you're going to see the color that's left behind because you're not going to have all that water there that's making it look kind of transparent. I'm going to set this in front of me first. I got to hold this out at a distance. I think my table's lopsided. Got it tipping down a little bit. So I'm going to grab a little brown and a little bit of white. Just kind of, doesn't really matter. I just need something to straighten out this line. Oh, that's way too yellow.
Penny Cormier, could Canson black paper 145 pound take gouache?
Gosh, that's pretty heavy. I bet it would. It should be fine.
Ian Jackson, Lindsay, what are your thoughts on acrylic gouache?
You know, for someone who doesn't care for acrylic paint very much, I love acrylic gouache because of the matte finish. That matte finish makes a huge difference for me in how much I enjoy working with it. I feel like your traditional acrylics to me feel almost plasticky, but acrylic gouache for whatever reason feels just so much nicer. Maybe because it's more like a pastel effect, but I really like acrylic gouache. I've used the Turner, and that's really nice. That's from Jerry's Artorama. I'm dabbing on some white for the brighter highlights on the orange skin. Make sure your brush is clean while you're doing that. I feel like I got a little gray in there somehow. And it can lift up the paint underneath, so. Mr. Frugal's back.
Yes.
Chewy has gone to greet
Chewy
him.
was on alert.
Huh. This is highly unusual, she says.
Well, yes. Well, she's very excited when John came home this morning because we slept in a little bit, so we were a little late getting breakfast. She heard John Streckpole, and I was old news. Couldn't even eat her breakfast.
I'm gonna add a little yellow to that. That's really too stark. You want to kind of get that texture. You want to dry brush so you get that texture of the orange skin. And if it's too bright, just keep tapping it in until it blends in with what you have underneath. And Filbert's good for this because you've got that little bit of a rounded bristle tip anyway. That's way too white, so I'm going to go and grab some orange and tap that in there. All right, I'm going to let those set up. I'll probably come back and adjust in a little bit. Now for this orange skin there, that's going to have some shadow. And I'm going to take a little bit of the ultramarine blue and orange to make that shadow. So I'm just going to do that right over here. And I think I need a little heavier blue. So my only thing to be concerned with here when you're working with open colors like this is just be careful not to contaminate your main pots of color. So I'm going in here with this. You can go with a smaller brush if you want. So you have to get around those orange slices, and then you're going to be spreading this out, blending it in with the color that's already there. Leave a gap of that brighter color for the edge of the rind. I'm going to grab a smaller brush that I can move it around with. That's a little too small. Let's try this one. This is a round. We'll see how the round does. I think this is rounds tend to lift and push color more. That's why it's less useful with a thicker medium. But really, it's also really, you get really good detail, and since you don't really push watercolor around, it kind of does its thing. It works really well with watercolor. Okay. I'm going to try mixing the ultramarine blue and the vermilion on its own and see if I can get more of a purpley shadow. Just kind of like a dull purple. Because I feel like that's still a little grayed. A little too grayed. That's more what I want right there. Just going to add some and then blend it out with another brush. And if you feel like you need to blend it more, you can clean your brush, just get it wet and then just repaint it just with that damp brush, and it will mix in with whatever paint is underneath it. Okay, that's good for now. And I'm going to grab this is this tiny, tiny little flat brush, but it's got really good detail. I'm going to grab some white and a little bit of yellow with that. Need quite a bit of water on these really short bristle brushes because it just won't carry the paint otherwise.
Ian Jackson, how are you feeling about these gouache in comparison to, say, Winsor and Newton?
Never used Winsor and Newton gouache. I like them more than the Lucas gouache though. Just like not the I haven't tried their actually I don't know if they have a Lucas aqua gouache. I like them better than the Lucas. But I think it's mostly because I have more colors here. The Lucas I only had 12 colors, so that could be it. I'm not super experienced with gouache. I have some M. Graham gouache that's really nice. But I'm not a gouache connoisseur, so I can't give you too much of a comparison. They're cheaper, I can tell you that. A lot cheaper. If you're truly worried about light fastness, I probably would recommend the Schmincke or the M. Graham. I do believe their gouaches are light fast. The acrylic gouache tends to be more light fast, but it won't be rewettable because your acrylic gouache has that acrylic binder in it that just offers more protection to your pigments. On the back side of this rind, I just want to define it a little bit, but I'm just adding a lot of water to what I just used for color, that yellow-white mix. And I'm just going to kind of skim the edge of it. I just want definition, but I don't really want to, I just want you to be able to see that there's a back side to that. And now I'm going to grab some orange on its own and make that skin a little bit brighter. So I need my red. And I need my yellow for that. Using that same little brush so I can get that really crisp edge. And actually, to get that skin texture, instead of painting it like a line, you want to tap it in. Probably find all kinds of goodies because I haven't vacuumed today.
Why would you when you know Chewy's coming over?
Seriously, it's like having a robot, one of those robot vacuums, the iRoombas, whatever they're called.
Yeah, there's a couple different ones. I actually saw someone shared, one of my friends on Facebook shared, a friend of theirs had a Roomba and it was set to run at night. Mm-hmm. And they had a dog who had an accident.
Oh no!
And the Roomba went through the accident.
Oh, it's awful.
And continued through the house.
What a mess.
So the person woke up at 2:00 in the morning because
Oh,
of the
no.
smell
Gosh.
to a house covered in dog poop.
Oh my gosh, you would have to call professionals. I don't even know how you would.
I kind of threw up just reading the story. I was like, oh my god, that is.
Yeah, maybe don't set it to auto clean. Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah.
That poor person. I can't even imagine. 'Cause I mean,
know.
you get a little bit on your shoe and it reeks.
Oh god, and and I would imagine you would just have to throw the rumba out.
Oh my god, you'd have to tear your carpets out probably. Hopefully
Well,
they didn't have carpets.
I don't think they had carpets.
Oh, that's
But it was
good.
still just smeared
Oh man.
all over. So.
I'll stick with the old Electrolux for a few more years then.
Yeah, I'm like, I guess I'll just stick with my nice handy Kenmore vacuum and my steamer mop. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I want to try one of those steamer mops.
Oh, they're worth every penny. I've told you that. They're worth every penny. They're so wonderful.
I'm going to brighten up the color on the slices here. Remember to keep your strokes kind of going up and down from like the straight edge of the slice to the curve of the slice. And get some bright colors in there. Next time you eat an orange or grapefruit, like tear apart the pieces and hold them up to the light and see how pretty they are. They're like little gemstones. You want to get
Gemstones?
like gemstones, you know? They're so like tourmaline or ruby red grapefruit, lemons, limes. It's like nature's jewelry.
It is nature's jewelry.
Oh,
Still, I never got into grapefruit.
I love grapefruit.
I don't really like grapefruit flavored things.
I don't know if I like grapefruit flavored things so much. I like grapefruit scented things.
Yeah, the smell of I like the smell of limes and lemons and grapefruits, and I like limes and lemons, but grapefruits have never been.
I like that bitter flavor. Okay, we haven't added any highlights yet. We're just going in with the base colors still. I'm surprised the yellows aren't a little bit more opaque. If I had to have a criticism of this set, it's that I would like the yellows to be more opaque, and it surprises me because usually yellows, even with like watercolor or acrylic, well, not always with acrylic, but with like watercolor, your yellows tend to be your most opaque colors. So that would be, if I had to, it's hard to criticize an $18 set of paints, but if I had to put a criticism, it's just the yellows. They're very vivid, but they're not very opaque. But it's probably like red is very difficult to get opaque. It's a very vivid color, so. And it could just be something about gouache because I don't use gouache that much. But I want to change that. Last January, I was like, I'm going to do all these gouache tutorials because that way acrylic painters can follow along. And I don't know what happened. I must have packed them away. Put them in a box and forgot where I...
You were condoing your
That's
house.
true. That's true. What a difference this year made. Yeah, I hadn't
condoing everything. You only have so much time in a day, and you were doing your booth, and you were doing your tutorials, and you were doing your website, and you were doing your blog all by yourself, and you were raising your 3 kids and husband.
It's indeed very much raising. But I was thinking this week has been so great. Jason's been on the job this week. And I didn't realize it before, but I feel like I've been running uphill with a piano on my back, and it's like, and with him, he picked up editing so quick. I'm just like, oh my word, I've just finished this project. You can edit it. I can start a new project. I just feel like I can run at full speed,
You
doing
can
the
sit
stuff
down
I
and have a
love.
cup of tea for 10 minutes, and then start a project.
That's true, yeah. So yeah, he edited the last 2 stamping videos on the channel. He did a great job. I walked him through one video, and he knew what to do after that. He's
pretty smart.
That he is. All right, I feel like I need a little contrast between that skin and that slice of orange. So what I'm going to do right now, since I still have this color here, I'm just going to grab some of this shadowy color that I had been working with. I had made different shadows for parts of the plate and the oranges, and I'm just going to go in and add that to the skin. And I'm just going to kind of, I did it with the tip of that round brush. This is a number 4 round. The Zens do have a nice point to them, but if you have any brushes for acrylics, they're going to be fine. These won't hurt your watercolor brushes, but I feel like because they're thicker paint, they need a little bit more, a little bit stiffer of a brush. So if you have any golden Taklon brushes, so if you have watercolor brushes that have golden hair or white hair, those are going to be stiff enough to do this. The ones that have like the black hair, like the Neptunes or the Mimics, those are just too soft. They're not going to want to move your paint around too much, and they hold so much water that you're going to end up with lifting rather than applying the paint. So that would just be a little thing to keep in mind as you're working. Now I'm grabbing some of this color on the round brush so I don't get too much of it, and I'm going to add some to the slices here. Now, because this has a lot of water in it, it's looking a lot darker than it is for you guys and for me while I'm looking at it. So just kind of keep that in mind that I have a lot of water in here, so it's going to make that color look darker. Don't be afraid. It will lighten up as it dries. But again, keep with those streaks, those lines.
Joseph Anthony, what should I do if my student grade watercolor does not blend properly when added with water on paper?
Well, you could do a couple things. You can add some Oxgall to your rinse water, and that will help your paint. If it's not flowing, if that's what you mean by blending, like it's just not moving, you can add some Oxgall, or even you can even try a little alcohol, like rubbing alcohol or a detergent, something to make your water have a little less surface tension to it, and that will help you. And it could be a situation if your paper is too wet. Oftentimes your paint doesn't want to flow, because if your paper is really wet and your brush isn't that wet, what's going to happen, it's kind of like if you've ever tried to use like a Crayola marker on a piece of wet paper. What happens is it's kind of the opposite thing. The paper would be no, it's the same. The paper's wet and your marker or your paintbrush is drier, and it wants to suck up the water from your paper instead of putting it down, laying it down like you want. So you want your brush to be a little bit wetter than your paper if you find that situation. It's because the paint is going to want to go where it can equalize. It always is looking for the equal. So it's going to want, if the paper's drier, it's going to want to make it wetter, so it's going to leap off the brush and go to the paper. And vice versa. If your brush is drier, it's going to want to suck up the water from the paper into your brush. Did that make any sense, or did I just get...
It made sense to me.
Yeah, so if your paper is wet but a little bit drier than your brush, the paint should move on.
Kurt Schwartz, can you use a hairdryer with gouache?
Sure, won't hurt anything. There's no acrylic binders in there to blister or anything. That's why you can't use it with acrylics, or you're not supposed to use it with acrylics. Well, actually, you can use a hairdryer with acrylics. Oh, Joey, are you okay?
Oh, she's fine.
You don't want to use a heat tool with acrylics because it can bubble it.
I trip over her regularly.
I'm gonna add a little bit of Rhine on some of these, like this one down here. So I just took my orange, the darker orange, the vermilion, and a little bit of yellow, and just did a line, basically a semicircle line. And I think I want to do that to this one back here a little bit more. And then we'll be able to add our whites, and that's really gonna make it look like our orange slices.
Stephen Sapos, how does Lindsay rate these against Holbein, M. Graham, and others?
I have used M. Graham. I only have 3 colors of M. Graham, so I don't feel I can give a proper comparison. M. Graham is my favorite watercolor, but I have only used their gouache a little bit. To me, they seem very similar. They seem very similar to the Lucas. But then again, I don't have experience with Holbein. I don't have that much experience with gouache, so I can't compare to things I haven't used. Okay, now I'm going to go with some white, and I'm just going to grab this little bit of white that I have up here in the corner because I don't need a lot of it, and I do want it to have a little bit of a creamy tint to it, and I've got yellow right there, so That's going to work. I'm going to start with this number 4 round, and then I'm probably going to move along to this little tiny 20/0 round or spotter brush. So for my thicker lines, I'm going to go right in here with this, and I am going to start putting some of the skins from the membranes of the orange. So where I want my thicker lines, that's what I'm doing first. I like to wait towards the end to do any white details because they do tend to really sharpen things up. And it's kind of hard to go in and around them once you've put them down there because the white is such a strong color. And it's also a big, like, kind of ta-da moment when you do that, so it's nice to wait for the end to do that. Look what I did!
Ta-da!
I was listening to a podcast, the Happier podcast with Gretchen Rubin, and she had a viewer that called in and said, make a ta-da list, not a to-do list. So, like, yeah, you write down the things you accomplished during the day instead of writing down all the things you have to do. So then when you look at it, you feel like, oh, cool, I got all that done. Ta-da!
Supritha B, can we get gouache effect with watercolor paint mixed with white?
You can somewhat, yeah. For your more vivid colors, like if I were gonna take like one of these bright greens or bright blues and just add white to them in watercolor, I'm gonna get a pastel shade, which would be very impressionistic and pretty. There's nothing wrong with that, but you wouldn't get the vibrancy of color that you would from a gouache, just because the gouache is designed to be vibrant and opaque. It's kind of designed more like an acrylic in color. I mean, not all acrylic's transparent, but it's a lot more similar. Now I'm going in with that smaller brush. But yeah, totally, give it a try. I think in the long run, you're going to spend more money. If you decide you really love it, you might want to consider getting some gouache just because you're going to spend a lot more money mixing down your watercolors because the watercolors are more expensive.
Moon Ram, which do you think works better for plein air? Gouache or watercolor?
I still would probably go with watercolor because you're using a thinner layer of it on paper. I feel like the paper would be much more portable, and I'm a faster painter in watercolor. The practice piece, I started around 9:30 and it was 11:30 by the time I had it done enough that I could take a picture and do a blog post about it. So second time's going a little bit faster, but yeah, if I'm painting outside, I need something that I can use fairly quickly, so it would be oils or watercolor for me. This brush here is good for doing your smaller lines. Be careful of using the white on its own too much because it looks really stark. I feel like it needs more yellow, a little yellow in it. You have to reload because the brush is so small, you got to reload more often. And re-wet it a lot. So any place you think you need you need some definition and everything's just really dark, you can use a white to do that. And I bet your gel pen would stick on top of this just fine too if you wanted to do that. But you can get really good detail with the gouache, and the gouache white is I don't know if it's as opaque as a gel pen, but it's pretty darn close. We are just about done. So if you think of any last minute questions, you can go ahead and mention them. I feel like I need maybe a little bit of a blue cast on some of these shadows, so I'm just going to grab a little bit of ultramarine, that small brush so I don't get too crazy, and quite a bit of water. And I'm just going to dab in little bits where I feel like I see some blue. And plus that blue will make my orange seem a little bit more vivid. Blue and orange are opposites, so they make good shadow colors. I don't feel like mixing opposites gives me as much mud in gouache, ironically, as it does in watercolor. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. I want a little more blue. And I'm just a very minuscule amount here. I wonder if anybody is painting along with their gouache at home or their watercolors at home.
Nobody's mentioned, but
they probably couldn't if they're busy painting.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are watching because we don't get a lot of gouache videos.
No, you don't.
So I think a lot of people are watching and learning.
Going back to that bigger brush, I feel like I need like a little shadow. Kind of, or it looks like there's a seed over here. I want a little shadow in there. There we go. Just kind of a glaze, really. So I'm using it really transparently, and I just want to get the impression of a seed. Now I think I'm going to go in with a little bit of white. And we'll see if I need any more of the brighter colors. And then we'll do our final highlights and we will be good. I'm going to grab some yellow. You can add little sparks of color too if you want to. If you want it to show up, just don't blend it in too much. If you feel like you want it to mix in with what you have underneath, just kind of wiggle your brush a few times until you get that mixing. It's very versatile. Okay, so I'm going to take this little, it's a probably like, let's see, is there a size on this? 1/8 angular, tiny brush here. And I'm loading it up with a white. And now we're going to do final highlights. I am going to do like kind of a little bit of a highlight on the edge of the rind here. You don't want too much water in this. You want it to be really opaque. And do some of this white membrane, connecting these two pieces of fruit. I'm gonna get these guys up here. That top membrane where they all connect in the middle is usually the brightest. I'm gonna grab that little brush one more time though, and just put a few more little lines kind of coming off there. And of course you could play with your painting all day long. You could, you know, there's a lot you can do with it. I'm going to do a couple brighter highlights right on top of the highlight areas on these orange skins. And I'm pretty happy with the way the cloth came out here, but if you thought it was too stark, you can take a fan brush and just, I would wet it. I'm not wetting it now because I'm happy with the way mine turned out, but just kind of drag it across and you can, like, you know, go back and forth with the direction of the weave that you painted on there, and you can soften it until you're happy with how softened you've got it. So very versatile. You can keep messing with it till you have it just right. I did not put a little highlight on the top of my little metal thing here. I want to get that highlighted. Just try to do like a stroke or two and then call it a day. You don't want to go too overboard. But there we have it. Any other questions before we sign off?
We're all caught up.
All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for taking a chance on this new medium, new to us anyway here for our live streams. And let me know in the comments after the live stream if you have any questions about this that I didn't get a chance to answer on air. And please give me a thumbs up before you go, because that really helps out my channel. I'm gonna very stealthily switch screens here, hopefully. It's there we go. Anything to add, Sarah?
Nope, that's it.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. Have a great weekend. And until next time, happy crafting.